The most dangerous mistake isn't underestimating someone's strength. It's believing their child has no one coming. The sound that echoed across the quiet neighborhood park wasn't a scream. It wasn't a siren. It was the sharp silence that follows the moment everyone realizes something has gone terribly wrong. A young girl lay on the grass, clutching her arm against her chest, her breathing quick and uneven as frightened faces gathered several yards away. 3 white police officers stood nearby, their expressions caught somewhere between certainty and disbelief, convinced only seconds earlier that they were dealing with a dangerous situation. One officer kept repeating that she had refused to cooperate. Another insisted they had followed procedure. But none of those explanations could quiet the uneasy whispers spreading through the growing crowd. Cell phones slowly rose into the air. A mother pulled her little boy closer. An elderly veteran removed his baseball cap and stared without saying a word. The girl wasn't crying loudly. She was trying not to. Her eyes searched the faces around her, as if hoping someone would simply tell her everything would be okay. Then the screen fades into darkness, and a single sentence lingers in the silence. 3 hours earlier, the morning had begun with the kind of peace people rarely notice until it's gone. 12-year-old Emily Carter stepped out onto the front porch carrying a worn backpack decorated with tiny patches she had sewn on herself over the years. The neighborhood was waking slowly. Sprinklers clicked across green lawns. A golden retriever barked at squirrels across the street. The smell of fresh coffee drifted from open kitchen windows while school buses rolled through familiar routes. Emily paused long enough to wave at Mrs. Henderson watering her flowers before checking the small digital watch wrapped around her wrist. It had been a birthday gift from her father. He always reminded her to wear it wherever she went. Not because it was expensive, but because he believed every parent deserved one more way to know their child was safe. Inside the house, a tall man stood quietly in the kitchen pouring orange juice into 2 glasses. His movements were calm, almost ordinary, the kind that belonged to a father more concerned about packing lunches than living up to any reputation the outside world attached to his name. Chuck Norris smiled as Emily hurried back through the doorway after realizing she had forgotten her science project. He handed it to her before she could even ask. "You forgot your volcano again," he said with a gentle laugh. Emily rolled her eyes and hugged him tightly. "Good thing you always remember everything." Chuck smiled, but answered with the same lesson he had repeated since she was old enough to understand. "No, sweetheart. I just try to remember what matters most." She nodded, grabbed her backpack, and headed toward the sidewalk. Before she reached the corner, she turned back one last time. He was still standing there, waving exactly the way he always did every school morning. Neither of them could have imagined that by the end of the day, that ordinary goodbye would become the moment both of them wished they could relive forever. As Emily disappeared beyond the maple trees lining the street, the neighborhood settled back into its peaceful rhythm. Somewhere in the distance, a police radio crackled with the report of a suspicious person matching only the vaguest description. Somewhere else, assumptions began traveling faster than facts. And without anyone realizing it, lives moving on completely separate paths were racing toward a single moment that would soon change every one of them. Emily Carter had always believed that kindness was something you practiced every day, not only when people were watching. Her teachers knew her as the student who stayed after class to help stack library books without being asked. Her neighbors recognized her as the girl who carried groceries for Mrs. Henderson every Saturday morning before finishing her own chores. She was only 12 years old, yet she carried herself with a quiet confidence that came from growing up in a home where respect was never demanded, but always earned. Chuck Norris had never raised his daughter to think the world owed her anything because of his name. In fact, most people in their small Texas community barely knew who he was beyond a friendly father who volunteered at youth sports events, repaired broken fences for elderly neighbors, and never missed a parent-teacher conference. At home, he rarely spoke about achievements or fame. Instead, he talked about choices. Every breakfast came with a conversation. Every drive to school ended with another lesson about character. That morning had been no different. Before Emily left the house, Chuck had gently reminded her that courage was not measured by how loudly someone spoke or how strong they appeared. Courage, he said, was choosing honesty even when it was difficult and showing compassion even when others did not deserve it. Emily had smiled because she had heard those words many times before, yet somehow they always sounded new. As she walked toward Jefferson Middle School, she greeted nearly everyone she passed. Mr. Alvarez waved from his hardware store while Officer Daniels, an older patrol officer assigned to the school crossing, tipped his hat and wished her a great day. Emily smiled back with genuine warmth because encounters like those reinforced everything her father believed about people. Most individuals wanted to do the right thing. Most wore a badge because they hoped to help others. That belief had become part of who she was. School passed quietly. Her science presentation earned applause from classmates after her homemade volcano erupted exactly as planned. During lunch, she shared cookies with a friend who had forgotten theirs. And after the final bell, she spent 20 extra minutes helping her teacher organize classroom supplies for the following week. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the sidewalks as she began the familiar 1-mile walk home, earbuds tucked safely into her backpack because her father preferred that she stay aware of her surroundings. She noticed children laughing on bicycles, families mowing lawns, and delivery trucks making their final neighborhood stops. Everything felt wonderfully ordinary, the kind of peaceful afternoon that slips by without anyone imagining history is quietly approaching. A few blocks away, however, a radio transmission interrupted the routine rhythm of another day. A dispatcher relayed a report from an anonymous caller describing a suspicious young person seen near the neighborhood park. The description was frustratingly vague, offering little more than approximate age, clothing, and direction of travel. Even so, the message carried enough urgency to redirect several patrol units already nearby. Inside one cruiser, assumptions began filling the empty spaces that facts had left behind. None of the officers had met Emily Carter before. None of them knew where she had spent the day, what kind of family she came from, or the values she carried with every step. They only knew they were heading toward the park at the same moment a 12-year-old girl was taking the path she had walked safely hundreds of times before, completely unaware that ordinary minutes were quietly giving way to a life-changing afternoon. Emily adjusted the straps of her backpack as she reached the entrance to Maple Grove Park, the shortcut she had taken home since the first week of middle school. The park was peaceful in the late afternoon, filled with the ordinary sounds that made a neighborhood feel safe. Children chased one another across the playground, while grandparents occupied shaded benches, watching the world move at an unhurried pace. A young couple pushed a stroller along the walking path, and a food truck parked near the basketball courts served lemonade and pretzels to families enjoying the warm Texas weather. Emily slowed her pace when she noticed a small golden dog standing alone near the edge of the sidewalk. Its leash trailed loosely behind it, and it seemed more curious than frightened. Kneeling carefully, she checked the tag on its collar and smiled when she read the name Bailey. "I bet someone is looking for you," she whispered softly before gently holding the leash so the little dog would not wander into the street. Only a few seconds later, an elderly man hurried around the corner, breathing heavily with worry written across his face. The moment he saw Bailey, relief washed over him. "Thank you," he said with a grateful smile. "She slipped away while I was loading groceries into my truck." Emily handed over the leash and smiled back. She stayed close. "I just wanted to make sure she was safe." The man thanked her again before continuing on his way, never realizing that his brief conversation would become one of the last peaceful moments before everything changed. As Emily continued walking, she glanced at the digital watch on her wrist. 4:23 in the afternoon. Her father would probably already be preparing dinner, and she smiled at the thought of telling him about her science project and the rescued dog. At that same moment, several blocks away, 3 patrol vehicles quietly turned toward Maple Grove Park after receiving the earlier dispatch report. Officer Brandon Keller sat behind the wheel of the lead cruiser, his eyes scanning every sidewalk and open field. Beside him, Officer Travis Cole reviewed the limited information displayed on the patrol computer. There was still no confirmed crime, no identified suspect, and no verified witness beyond the anonymous phone call. Even so, the atmosphere inside the vehicles had begun to change. The uncertainty of the report slowly gave way to assumptions that had never been supported by evidence. As the cruisers entered the parking lot, Emily noticed them immediately. She instinctively stepped farther onto the sidewalk to give the vehicles room to pass, just as her father had always taught her. Respect the rules. Stay calm. Cooperate when spoken to. Those simple lessons had guided her entire childhood. She had no reason to believe this afternoon would be any different. The first cruiser slowed instead of continuing past her. The second stopped several yards behind it. The third remained near the park entrance, quietly blocking the narrow roadway leading back toward the neighborhood. Curious park visitors paused their conversations and looked in the same direction. Emily stood still, confused but composed, believing the officers were probably searching for someone else. She glanced behind her, expecting another person to appear, but the walking path remained empty. Then Officer Keller opened his door and began walking toward her with measured steps. His expression revealed neither anger nor kindness, only complete certainty that he had already found the person he had been sent to locate. Emily offered a polite smile, unaware that within the next few minutes, a series of decisions based on incomplete information would transform an ordinary walk home into a moment that no one standing in that park would ever forget. Officer Brandon Keller stopped several feet away from Emily and studied her without offering so much as a greeting. Behind him, Officers Travis Cole and Ryan Mitchell spread out across the walking path, their movements causing nearby families to pause in quiet confusion. Emily tightened her grip on the straps of her backpack, but remembered exactly what her father had always taught her. Stay calm. Speak clearly. Show respect, even if respect is not immediately returned. She offered a small smile and said, "Good afternoon, officers. Is everything all right?" Keller ignored the question. His eyes moved from her backpack to the digital watch on her wrist before returning to her face. "What are you doing in this park?" he asked in a firm voice. Emily answered honestly, "I am walking home from Jefferson Middle School." "Do you have identification?" he continued. Emily nodded. "My school identification card is inside my backpack." Before she could slowly reach for the zipper, Keller lifted one hand. "Do not move until I tell you." Emily immediately froze. Around them, conversation stopped. Parents quietly gathered their children a little closer while several people instinctively reached for their phones, uncertain why such an ordinary interaction suddenly felt unusually tense. Officer Cole glanced at the dispatch notes on his mobile computer once more. The description remained frustratingly incomplete. Female, approximately 12 years old. Backpack, dark shirt, walking near the park. It could have described dozens of students leaving school that afternoon. "She matches what we received," Cole quietly remarked. Officer Mitchell hesitated. "We still do not know if the caller actually saw anything illegal." Keller answered without taking his eyes off Emily. "We are going to figure that out." Emily noticed the brief exchange and spoke politely. "If someone is looking for another person, I would be happy to show you my school card. My father always tells me to cooperate." Keller's expression remained unreadable. "Set your backpack on the ground." She slowly lowered it exactly as instructed. "Now step back." Again, she obeyed without hesitation. The people gathered nearby exchanged uneasy looks. An elderly woman whispered to her husband that the little girl had not done anything except answer questions respectfully. A teenage boy quietly began recording from several yards away, sensing that something about the situation did not feel right. Keller opened the backpack while Cole observed. Inside were neatly organized notebooks, a science folder with bright construction paper, a reusable water bottle, and the model volcano Emily had proudly presented only hours earlier. There was nothing unusual, nothing dangerous, nothing suggesting criminal activity. Emily watched silently, hoping the misunderstanding would end within seconds. Instead, Keller looked toward her again. "Who are your parents?" he asked. "My father is Chuck Norris," Emily answered naturally, never imagining that the name would sound unbelievable to strangers. For just a moment, the officers looked at one another. Then Keller gave a short, dismissive laugh. "Do you expect us to believe that?" Emily blinked in confusion. "I am telling the truth." Cole folded his arms. "People make up stories when they get nervous." "I am not making up anything," Emily replied softly. "If you would like, you can call him. He always answers." Mitchell shifted uneasily, glancing once more at the backpack and then at the calm 12-year-old standing in front of them. Everything about her behavior suggested honesty, yet the atmosphere had already begun moving in another direction. Facts were slowly losing ground to assumptions, and with every passing second, the distance between a simple conversation and a life-changing misunderstanding grew smaller than anyone standing in Maple Grove Park could possibly imagine. Emily could feel every pair of eyes in the park resting on her, but she refused to panic. Her father had taught her that fear often spread faster than truth, and that staying calm was sometimes the strongest choice a person could make. She took one slow breath before speaking again. "Please call my father. He will explain everything." Officer Keller shook his head before she even finished the sentence. "Enough with the stories." Emily looked toward Officer Mitchell, whose expression suggested uncertainty rather than anger. "Sir, my school identification is right there. My teachers know where I have been all day." Mitchell glanced toward the open backpack, then back at Keller, but before he could respond, another voice came through the patrol radio. The dispatcher repeated that the anonymous caller had lost sight of the suspicious person and could not provide any additional details. Instead of reducing the tension, the incomplete information seemed only to reinforce Keller's determination that they had already found the right individual. Nearby, Mrs. Henderson had just arrived at the edge of the park after finishing her gardening. The moment she recognized Emily, she immediately raised her voice. "Officers, that is Chuck's daughter. She lives just a few streets from here." Keller acknowledged the woman with only a brief glance. "Ma'am, please stay back while we finish our investigation." "There is nothing to investigate," Mrs. Henderson replied. "I have known that child for years." Several other neighbors quietly nodded in agreement, but uncertainty had already settled over the scene. Emily remained exactly where she had been instructed to stand. She kept her hands visible and her voice steady. "I am not trying to cause any problems. I only want to go home." Keller stepped closer. "We need you to come with us until we verify your identity." Emily looked confused. "My identity is in my backpack. You already have my school card." "That is not enough," Keller answered. Emily hesitated for only a moment before carefully lifting her left wrist. "This watch has an emergency contact. If you press the button, it will call my father." Keller reached toward the watch, intending to remove it while continuing the investigation. Emily instinctively pulled her arm back only a few inches, not to resist, but because the watch had tremendous sentimental value. It had been her father's birthday gift, and she had never taken it off. The tiny movement instantly changed the atmosphere. Keller interpreted it as refusal. Voices overlapped. Instructions came too quickly. Emily tried to explain that she was only protecting the watch, but the words disappeared beneath louder commands. In the confusion that followed, she lost her balance and stumbled awkwardly. As people gasped and rushed forward, the encounter ended with Emily sitting on the grass, clutching one arm tightly against her chest, her face pale with shock and pain. The park fell into an almost unbearable silence. No one cheered. No one argued. Even the children on the playground stopped moving. Mrs. Henderson covered her mouth with trembling hands while the teenage boy recording lowered his phone for a brief second, unable to believe what he had just witnessed. Officer Mitchell immediately knelt beside Emily, concern replacing hesitation. "Someone call an ambulance," he said, his voice no longer uncertain, but urgent. Emily fought back tears as she whispered only one sentence. "Please, can somebody call my dad?" Almost at that exact moment, many miles away inside Chuck Norris's workshop, a quiet vibration echoed from the emergency alert connected to the digital watch he had given his daughter. He looked down at the screen, and the color slowly disappeared from his face. The alert appeared on Chuck Norris's watch display with a sharp vibration he had never seen before. The screen showed only 3 words. "Emergency signal activated." For a brief moment, the workshop became completely silent. The unfinished wooden table in front of him no longer mattered. The tools scattered across the bench no longer existed in his mind. Every instinct he had developed over a lifetime focused on one simple fact. His daughter needed him. Chuck reached for his phone and called Emily immediately. The call rang once, then twice, then went unanswered. He called again. The same result. Without hesitation, he opened the emergency tracking application connected to the watch he had given her on her last birthday. Park, less than 15 minutes away. He grabbed his truck keys and was already pulling out of the driveway before the garage door had completely opened. The drive felt longer than it had ever felt before. Every traffic light seemed slower. Every passing vehicle became another obstacle between a father and his child. Yet despite the urgency racing through his mind, his hands remained steady on the steering wheel. Panic solved nothing. Emily knew that because he had spent years teaching her exactly that. At Maple Grove Park, The atmosphere had changed completely. The ambulance had not yet arrived, but the crowd had doubled in size. More neighbors recognized Emily and began asking questions the officers struggled to answer. Mrs. Henderson refused to leave the girl's side, gently reassuring her that help was coming. Emily nodded weakly, still trying to remain brave despite the fear written across her face. Officer Mitchell stayed beside her as well, carefully speaking into his radio while requesting medical assistance for a juvenile. His voice carried none of the confidence it had only minutes earlier. Something inside him had shifted. He replayed every moment of the encounter in his mind and wondered whether different choices could have led to a different ending. Nearby, Officer Keller attempted to maintain control of the growing crowd. "Everyone needs to step back," he repeated. "Please give emergency personnel room to work." But the questions only became louder. "Why was she stopped?" one father demanded. "She was just walking home," another neighbor said. "She never raised her voice," added a woman who had watched the entire encounter from the walking trail. Even Officer Travis Cole appeared increasingly uncomfortable as he reviewed the dispatch information again. The anonymous report still contained nothing connecting Emily to any actual crime. Nothing had changed except the consequences of assumptions made too quickly. Then a young teenager quietly stepped forward holding his phone. "I recorded everything," he said. The words seemed to freeze the entire park. Keller slowly looked toward the device, while several people exchanged silent glances. More voices followed. Another woman admitted she had also recorded part of the incident. A delivery driver parked across the street pointed toward the security cameras mounted outside a nearby pharmacy. Without anyone planning it, multiple sources of evidence had begun appearing from every direction. Emily closed her eyes for a moment as another wave of discomfort passed through her. Mrs. Henderson gently squeezed her shoulder. "Your father is coming," she whispered. Emily managed a faint smile because she believed her completely. Less than 5 minutes later, an old pickup truck turned into the park entrance. It was not flashy. It did not arrive with flashing lights or loud engines. It rolled quietly across the parking lot before stopping near the gathering crowd. The driver's door opened, and Chuck Norris stepped out. He did not run. He did not shout. He simply looked toward the people surrounding his daughter, and the expression on his face carried something far more powerful than anger. It carried the quiet determination of a father whose only concern was reaching his child. Every conversation in the park seemed to disappear the moment Chuck Norris reached Emily's side. He dropped to one knee without saying a single word, gently brushing a strand of hair away from her face before carefully taking her uninjured hand. "I am here, sweetheart," he said softly. Emily opened her eyes and managed a small smile that was equal parts relief and exhaustion. "I knew you would come." Chuck nodded, keeping his voice calm despite the emotion visible in his eyes. "You never have to wonder about that." He looked briefly toward the ambulance turning into the parking lot before returning his full attention to his daughter. "Can you tell me what happened?" Emily swallowed carefully. "I tried to answer every question. I told them they could call you. I did not want anyone to get into trouble." Chuck gently squeezed her hand. "You did exactly what I taught you to do." The paramedics quickly approached, introducing themselves before beginning their assessment. Chuck stepped back just enough to give them room, remaining close enough that Emily could see him every second. He listened carefully as the lead paramedic explained that they would transport her to the nearest children's hospital for a full evaluation. Chuck thanked them with quiet respect before standing and turning toward the officers for the first time. His expression remained controlled. There was no shouting, no threats, only complete focus. "Which one of you was in charge?" he asked. Officer Keller stepped forward. "That would be me." Chuck nodded once. "I would like the names and badge numbers of every officer involved." Keller hesitated for a fraction of a second before providing the information. Chuck took out his phone and entered every name without interruption. "I would also like every body camera preserved immediately," he continued. "Please notify your supervisor that no recordings are to be altered, deleted, or delayed." Officer Cole shifted uneasily. Mitchell lowered his eyes. Chuck then looked toward the growing crowd. "If anyone witnessed what happened, I would appreciate your contact information. I only want the truth." The response surprised everyone. Hands slowly rose across the park. The teenager who had recorded the encounter stepped forward first. "I have the entire thing on video." The delivery driver followed. "My truck camera was pointed toward the sidewalk." Mrs. Henderson spoke next. I watched almost everything from the beginning. Within moments, half a dozen witnesses volunteered to help. Chuck thanked each one personally. He never interrupted anyone or suggested what they should say. Please describe only what you personally saw, he told them. Facts matter more than assumptions. Those words seemed to settle over the park with unexpected weight. Officer Mitchell quietly removed his own notebook and began reviewing the sequence of events again, his confidence replaced by careful reflection. Even Officer Cole appeared unsettled as he replayed the dispatch message in his memory, realizing how little verified information they had actually possessed before approaching Emily. A black sport utility vehicle suddenly entered the parking lot, and a police lieutenant stepped out after receiving notification from dispatch that multiple civilian recordings existed. He immediately recognized Chuck Norris and walked over with measured professionalism. Sir, I am Lieutenant Daniel Harper. I have been briefed on the situation. I assure you this incident will receive a complete and independent review. Chuck extended his hand and shook the lieutenant's firmly. That is all I am asking for, he replied. My daughter deserves the truth. Your officers deserve the truth. Your department deserves the truth. Let the evidence speak before anyone else does. The lieutenant nodded solemnly, understanding that the most important moment of the day had only just begun. The following morning, the story was no longer confined to Maple Grove Park. Before sunrise, local television stations began broadcasting footage recorded by witnesses from multiple angles. By lunchtime, national news organizations had picked up the story. Millions of people watched the same quiet sequence unfold. They saw a respectful 12-year-old girl answering every question calmly. They saw neighbors attempting to explain who she was. They heard repeated requests to call her father. They watched confusion grow where certainty had once existed. Most importantly, they saw how quickly assumptions had replaced verified facts. The public reaction was immediate. Community leaders called for transparency rather than speculation. Civil rights organizations requested an independent review. Former law enforcement officials appeared on television reminding viewers that professionalism depended on careful judgment, especially when children were involved. The conversation spread far beyond one neighborhood. It became a discussion about responsibility, accountability, and the importance of slowing down before reaching conclusions. At the children's hospital, Emily rested comfortably after doctors completed a thorough evaluation. Her arm had been stabilized, and the physicians assured Chuck that she was expected to make a full recovery with time and rehabilitation. Even while recovering, Emily remained more concerned about others than herself. She quietly asked whether the officers were all right and whether anyone else had been hurt during the confusion. Chuck smiled, gently, proud that pain had not changed the kindness inside his daughter. Your heart is still exactly the same, he told her. Never let anyone take that away from you. Later that afternoon, Lieutenant Daniel Harper arrived at the hospital carrying no cameras and making no public statements. He simply introduced himself to Emily, wished her a speedy recovery, and informed Chuck that every available piece of evidence had been secured. Body camera recordings had been preserved. Civilian videos had been collected. Dispatch communications had been archived. Security footage from nearby businesses had also been obtained. The review will follow the evidence wherever it leads, the lieutenant said. Chuck nodded appreciatively. That is the only way trust can be rebuilt. Meanwhile, Officer Mitchell voluntarily submitted a detailed statement acknowledging moments during the encounter when he believed the situation should have slowed down rather than escalate. Officer Cole also cooperated fully with investigators, admitting that the original dispatch information had never confirmed any criminal conduct. Administrative procedures were initiated for everyone directly involved while the investigation continued, and the department announced additional training focused on communication, decision-making, and interactions with young people during field investigations. Across the country, people who had never met Emily Carter began sending handwritten cards filled with encouragement. Elementary school students mailed drawings wishing her a quick recovery. Veterans groups, church communities, teachers, and first responders sent messages reminding her that one painful experience did not define an entire nation. Mrs. Henderson visited the hospital carrying homemade cookies that Emily insisted everyone share with the nursing staff. Even the teenage boy whose recording helped preserve the truth stopped by with his parents, quietly thanking Emily for remaining calm when many adults might not have been able to do the same. As evening settled outside the hospital window, Chuck stood looking across the parking lot where families came and went beneath the fading Texas sky. The events of the previous 24 hours had changed many lives, but he believed something important had also emerged from the pain. When ordinary people chose truth over fear and evidence over assumption, justice did not belong to the loudest voice in the room. It belonged to the facts, and the facts had finally begun to speak. 6 months later, the maple trees surrounding Maple Grove Park had turned a deeper shade of green, and the neighborhood once again echoed with the ordinary sounds of children laughing, bicycles rolling across sidewalks, and families gathering beneath the evening sky. Emily Carter walked along the same path she had traveled countless times before, her arm fully healed after months of dedication, patience, and encouragement from doctors, therapists, friends, and family. The experience had left memories that would never completely disappear, but it had also revealed something even stronger than fear. It had shown her what happened when ordinary people chose courage instead of silence. Mrs. Henderson waved from her front yard exactly as she always had. The teenager whose phone recording helped preserve the truth now volunteered with a local youth mentorship program, reminding younger students that integrity sometimes began with simply telling the truth about what they had seen. Officer Mitchell remained with the department after additional training and publicly spoke about the importance of slowing down, listening carefully, and allowing facts to guide decisions rather than assumptions. His willingness to acknowledge mistakes became part of a broader effort to strengthen trust between officers and the communities they served. Chuck Norris never celebrated the public attention surrounding the case. Whenever reporters asked him how he had stayed so calm during the most difficult moments, his answer never changed. "My job was never to defeat people. My job was to stand beside my daughter and let the truth do its work." Those words spread far beyond Texas because they carried a lesson people from every background could understand. Strength was not measured by raising a voice. It was measured by protecting those who needed protection while refusing to abandon dignity or compassion. One Saturday afternoon, Chuck and Emily returned to the same park together. They walked slowly beneath the trees until they reached the bench where everything had changed months earlier. Emily looked around at children playing nearby and smiled quietly. "For a long time I thought I would never want to come back here," she admitted. Chuck nodded with understanding. "What changed?" Emily watched a little girl helping another child who had fallen off a scooter before answering. "I realized this place is not defined by one bad day. It is defined by the good people who refuse to look away." Chuck smiled with unmistakable pride. "That is exactly why you are stronger today than you were before." As the sun began to set, father and daughter stood together watching families enjoy another peaceful evening. The park no longer represented fear. It represented resilience, accountability, and hope. It reminded everyone who knew the story that justice was never about humiliating another person. It was about making certain that truth was heard, mistakes were acknowledged, and every child could walk home believing they mattered. Emily slipped her hand into her father's, and together they started toward home along the familiar sidewalk where an ordinary afternoon had once become unforgettable. This time, however, every step carried something different. Not anger, not bitterness, only quiet confidence that honesty, compassion, and courage could outlast prejudice. Because badges earn respect through integrity, power earns respect through responsibility, but character earns respect forever. And in the end, the greatest victory did not belong to the strongest person in the park. It belonged to the people who chose truth when it would have been easier to choose silence.